Did you know that 1 in 4 Canadian boys in high schools do not finish their schooling on time, a rate which is much, much higher than that of Canadian girls? Did you know that similar phenomena are actually pretty common and pretty standard across the world, and there is a problem that we are having right now with young men in education, and then after that getting young men into the workforce? And no, it is not the evil liberals' fault, it's not the fault of the feminazis. It is due to a problem that has come to be known as failure to launch syndrome. And that's what I want to talk about in this video, because I don't really give too much of a shit who's to blame. If you want to blame feminists, that's fine. If you want to blame toxic masculinity, that's fine. I really don't care. I just want to kind of focus on this issue and maybe start talking about solutions. We are far too often pulled away from finding solutions by pointless and counterproductive tribalism. So in this video, I want to talk about the issue, and I want to talk about what we can potentially do to solve this problem on a smaller individual scale, all the way up to a larger, perhaps state level scale. But first of all, we have to talk about failure to launch syndrome, what it is, how it comes about, and then we can start to talk about what we can actually do about it. So when I was looking into this issue, this is the article that I found on Psychology Today about the issue of men, or rather boys, and failure to launch syndrome. So I'm going to read a little bit about it, and we're going to talk a little bit about the problem based off of this article before we jump into what the solutions are. So the article says that mounting evidence indicates that young men are facing increasing difficulties in completing an education and entering the workforce to become established and independent adults. This phenomenon is sometimes known as failure to launch. It talks a little bit about that example that I gave at the beginning about the 1 in 4 Canadian boys, and goes on to say that likewise men are underrepresented in tertiary education, making up around 40% of university students in the UK and Canada, and that male underrepresentation in tertiary education, that's going to university for an undergraduate, postgraduate, PhD, something like that, is particularly high in some developing nations such as Barbados, Jamaica, and Guyana, where young women are more than twice as likely to go to university compared to young men. And this was something that I was actually particularly interested in, because whilst it might not look like it, my entire family comes from Barbados. So this is something that actually, when I was researching it, kind of hit a little bit kind of hard for me, because I was thinking to myself, would I be in this situation that I am now, where I have a university degree and where I have managed to get myself through tertiary education? Would I have been able to do that if my parents had decided to stay in Barbados instead of kind of uprooting the family and bringing us all over to the UK instead? Relatedly, surveys indicate that young men are disproportionately represented in the not in education, employment, nor training, or the NEETs category. For example, the latest UK statistics document 191,000 male NEETs aged 16 to 24 compared to 124 female NEETs aged 16 to 24. Young men experiencing failure to launch are typically unemployed, living with their parents and out of the educational system, and this means they can lack the social capital that comes with workforce or educational participation. They may also lack financial capital, meaning an inability to go out and socialize with other youth. And this is something that we don't want. We do not want young people to get isolated. Isolation, as we have seen time and time again, particularly in the US, as recently as a couple of months ago with the Uvalde shooting, and with other mass shootings before that, isolation can very easily lead to radicalization, especially when it is combined with poor mental health, something that can be an effect of failure to launch, an inability to complete your education, an inability to find gainful employment. It says this is something that might contribute towards abnormally high rates of loneliness in young men across the globe. A recent US study found that almost 1 in 3 millennial men always or often felt lonely, and just over a quarter had no close friends. These rates are almost double the rates of loneliness seen in baby boomer men, and are much higher higher than the rates for millennial women. The simple fact of the matter is men are getting more and more lonely. They don't have close groups of friends that they can confide in. They don't have support networks of people to help them through tough times. As a millennial man, I can very much relate to this. Even though I have a lot of close friends, I will admit that probably a lot of the time, as a man, I feel quite lonely. Even though I do have friends and I do have a social network, it doesn't stop me from feeling isolated, especially when I feel like I am not living up to the standards that I feel that I'm supposed to live up to. And I know that this is something that is quite common among a lot of men. All this can leave young men bereft of meaning and purpose in life, creating disaffection, isolation, and alienation from society. Importantly, a large corpus of research indicates that factors such as low educational achievement, unemployment, and loneliness are strong determinants of mental health outcomes such as substance misuse, depression, and suicides, the first and the last of those being things that disproportionately affect men. Failure to launch syndrome is just another straw that is breaking the camel's back for young men, for boys, for men in general. There used to be a promise for boys and young men, something that we learned when we were quite young. I learned this when I was young, that there was a better future for me. All I had to do was work hard and everything would kind of fall into place. Like it or not, throughout the world, men and boys are indoctrinated with some version of the American dream, no matter where you are in the world. But the fact of the matter is, for men, there isn't a promise of a bright future anymore. It's just a future where they are increasingly less able to do what it is that they want to do. And please don't get me wrong, women are going through this as well, but men's issues are what I discuss on this channel. That's what I focus on. And in providing solutions for this problem and working towards those solutions together, we can solve this problem for men and for women at the same time. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how hard most men work nowadays, they are not going to be business leaders. Some won't even be able to provide for their family. There is no more social mobility. That seems to be what the statistics are saying. The rich are getting richer. There is a larger and larger accumulation of wealth in the hands of the few year on year. The COVID crisis only made this worse and much, much more apparent. And I can only hope for this level of kind of consciousness to arise more and more in working men, middle class men, so that we can rise up together to actually combat this issue at its source. But short of that kind of revolutionary attitude, let's talk about what we can do for actual solutions to this problem. So let's talk about this at an individual level first of all. One of the things that I agree is hugely beneficial for young men is effective mentorship. This is not something that happens anymore. Men do need positive male role models. It is something that men crave. It is something that I see in all men. And I'm not talking about a leader, I'm talking about a guide in the way of men. What are we as men supposed to do? How are we supposed to act? What are we supposed to be aiming towards? How do we work together? How do we be modern men? It used to be that back in the day, they were coming of age ceremonies for men. They were rites of passage. The elders of whatever tribe that you were in would take you out and separate you from everyone, from your mother, from your brothers and sisters, from your kind of larger social group, and they would take you out into the wilderness for a few days, a week, maybe a few weeks, and you would go through rites. You would learn what it is to be a man, and you would come back and you would be a man, and you would know what your purpose is, what your place is, and what you are supposed to do. We don't have that anymore, which isn't strictly true actually. We do have that. It just oftentimes costs about 10 or 20 grand to go to a men's camp. I think that effective mentorship of boys, of young men, and of men of all ages, men who haven't gone through these rites of passage, men who don't know what it is to be a man anymore, I think that effective mentorship can help to solve this problem. Other things that we can do kind of take on a more broad aspect. That is things like a general reform of the educational system, something which we haven't really reformed since the Victorian age. We are still learning useless shit in school. The amount of time that I spent learning geography is time that I could very well have spent learning an actual practical skill. I have never once had to tell someone at a job interview, for example, about the different types of volcanoes. It has been a perfectly useless thing for me to know about. We also need heavy investment in education. It's a cliche to say, but children are the future, and the fact that we do not pour nearly as much money into our schools as we should is hypocrisy. To me, it is a social crime. It's something that simply shouldn't be happening. It's such a no-brainer that if you want to have a socially or economically productive next generation, you've got to invest in them up front. The population is aging, so you need to get this investment in now. We especially need investment in things like after school programs. I was watching a documentary on Netflix just the other day about boxing clubs that are opened up in kind of low income neighborhoods in the US. They cost like $50,000 to run, when the cost of putting a child or a young man, as they would probably call them over there, in prison is like 60 grand a year. And that's one person. But you open up one of these boxing clubs and you get kids in there, you teach them something for free, you get them involved. It lowers their likelihood of committing crimes massively. It gets them engaged. It might even get them motivated enough to work towards getting their life in order as much as a child or a teenager or a young man can. We need investment in these kinds of after school programs, and that needs investment in schools. We also need more investment in school leavers, getting young men and young women into jobs that do not suck the life out of them and make them think, well, if I'm just going to have to suffer 40 hours a week flipping burgers and not even be able to make enough money so that I can own a house in 10 or 15 years, why shouldn't I just do fuck all and play video games all day? Invest in people who are leaving school. Get them to become economically productive members of society. As much as I hate that that is how we measure how much a person is worth to society, it is the way that we do, so we have to invest in that, make it happen. The fact that there are so many 16 to 24 year olds, 191,000 young men in the UK who aren't working, or they're not in education or any kind of training or anything like that, is a tragedy, and it's going to fuck us over for the future. A program of encouragement to get men into secondary or tertiary education, or at least to get them to complete secondary education and then encourage them into tertiary education. A program of encouragement to get men to invest in their mental health is also something that we should be looking into. And of course, my more utopian solution was I would just love to see some form of UBI that could be given out to people so that maybe young men and young women could take a step back from working a shitty job in McDonald's and actually think about what it is that they want to do with their life. Go and get a better job, go and get a better career, or start a business, become an entrepreneur, do something. That is my kind of pie in the sky fantasy type solution. But the other ones are things that we can work on an individual level in terms of mentorship as men to men as much as we can do. And then the other ones are things that we should be pressuring our state leaders, our MPs, our politicians, our senators, our congress people. We should be pressuring them into making this happen. we get them into office, we need to be using our collective power of bargaining to make these things happen as much as we can do. In terms of effective mentorship, I have also made a video on male role models, why it's important, what we can kind of do to get that out there. That kind of works in with what I spoke about with mentorship earlier. So check out the video that is popped up on the screen right now if you do want to learn about that a little bit more. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching the video. Like it if you liked it, comment, subscribe, all that shit. I'll see you in the next video.